Welcome to Debt to Cinema. I'm Brian Gillis.
And I'm Steven Maltmanex.
Like most people, we love going to the theater and catching the latest releases. However, it can sadly put a big dent in your wallet.
Fortunately, living in the digital age makes the viewing possibilities endless from the comforts of home.
Many of these films that you can see right from your couch, we're ashamed to say we missed, despite labeling ourselves cinephiles.
So join us as one or both of us cross off a title from our list of shame.
It can be an all-time essential classic,
Or an underrated piece of cinema that's worth giving a shot.
hell, it might just be some trashy film we want the other's opinion on. So sit tight and join us as we pay off our debts, $1 at a time.
In this one moment,
Hello, Di. How are you?
everyone is connected.
How come you only come here once a year?
You think I should come more often?
I don't know.
Every second is pivotal.
What changed? Tired. I want to put an end to it. Do you want to call him or not?
Catch 10 minutes of a stranger's world.
God, I'm so angry with you.
What?
I don't know. Ever since I was diagnosed, I've been hating your guts.
It will tell you a lifetime.
Thinking about your life like it's something that's going to happen later. Everything becomes today, not later.
It was about a year ago now, I think it was, when I picked The Secret in Their Eyes.
That was way back in Thanksgiving, I think.
Was it Thanksgiving?
I think so.
Regardless, it was a long time ago. It was over a year ago. One of the reasons I picked that, took Latin American cinema in college. It was on the syllabus. We watched a good chunk of it. This film was too. So we watched the grocery store sequence with Robin Wright, and then we also saw the final one with Glenn Close. So you got that reason. You throw in, I know you really loved it last year, Too Late, I would assume has a similar kind of essence in terms of filmmaking here, because this too was also shot in a series of one takes.
That one's completely different because that's a genre film. But you know what's funny is that Sidney Tamia Poitier, who's she's in the third sequence in this one.
Yeah, Jungle Julia.
Yeah, she's also in Too Late.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I picked this before it even happened, but you could throw in also the Women's March on Washington too, I guess, to make it super, super topical. But this is just one of those films that's been on my radar now for like 4 or 5 years. Like I said, same class from Secrets in Their Eyes.
Well, it's funny though, because I actually remember Dave in 320. Was it 320 or 322?
322.
Yeah, I remember him showing the final scene with Glenn Close in that class.
Maybe I saw that in that class.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were
one.
getting at. But
Maybe.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. That's where I first heard about this movie, or where I realized what this movie was right when that scene came up, and I was like, oh, that's probably the connection here in some way.
There's a college reason. Yeah, but I've wanted to see this for a long time. And this is like a really weird movie because it's all about women. It's called Nine Lives. It's a series of singular takes on film surrounding women. And 8 of the 9 of them are names that you know, or at least faces you know. The one exception is the very first one. It's also fitting because the first story here is also the worst one, which is kind of sad. Like, you don't want to open the movie this way. Like,
they're all kind of sad, to be fair, but this one's like that's
sad.
the worst one.
It's the worst one. The acting is the worst. You're kind of just thrown into it. You don't know what to expect.
No, well, not the worst as far as the acting. I mean, it's heartbreaking, I think, when you get down to the end of it, but that first one, actually, I think that's where I really felt that at least the aesthetic was working at that point, just this concept of a long take, and you're really feeling the space, and just it's presenting these moments in time that are supposed to feel real, and I thought for the most part it was working. But then, yeah, there are performances that just seem tacked on. There's lines of dialogue that don't work, and then you kind of realize that throughout the movie it's probably going to have a bunch of that.
It's for me, it's like all of them are really solid except the initial one, who's I can't remember the name of the character, because you get these
Sandra?
Is it Sandra? You get these
Yeah.
chapters that are separated by the name of the protagonist, the female protagonist, mind you, and who you're going to be following for these next 10 to 12 minutes or however long the reel of film is. And yeah, there's just something about hers that seems less realistic than the rest, and it's not in terms of what her story is. I think it gets a little too out there with the camera movement, especially with how many kind of like, I don't even know the correct term here, but how panorama it goes. It does lots of pivots to get you like a sweeping locale, and I guess it does a good job of trying to just introduce you to the kind of film, I don't know the right word, just I could
like
say
the aesthetic, really, because I mean,
aesthetic,
with that one,
yeah.
it's even though it's not a story that's going to tie in with the rest of them, except for one character showing up later. But I mean, for that story, that was one where I got a greater sense of the environment than I did of the character herself
You're wrong.
and her circumstances. Like,
That story is the only one that ties in twice. Sandra reappears. She's the girl in the motel that gets carted away by the cops, and then
okay,
also
I missed that one.
the police officer that is wrangling
he's,
her
he's
is
the
the
father,
father of Jungle Julia.
Yeah, I
Sidney
totally
Poitier's
missed
daughter.
the hotel one. Well, you don't see a close up of her though, do you?
No, but it's pretty obvious. Especially,
yeah. Now that you say it, it's a
yeah,
obvious connection.
Yeah, you get that line of dialogue. So we just kind of hinted at this. This is shared universe isn't really the correct term, but this is an anthology film where characters, bob and weave in between the varied stories. You could say, oh, this is a Pulp Fiction-esque type film, but that's not the only example out there. And it when you start realizing that it's a singular world, not even just a singular world, but this is all L.A., it kind of works itself out. It really pays dividends because even though these are just single takes following one character, maybe just like if this was a movie, this would be one scene for all these people with like rare exception. It feels a lot bigger than it should. You just have 9 stories, and yet it demands a 2-hour plus runtime, and it doesn't feel long. I think that's because of the nature of the way they're fragmented. Because I got up a good couple of times when I was watching this, went to get something to eat, go to the bathroom, whatever, and it allows you to do that, especially because these are kind of heart-wrenching stories. Every single one of them is emotional. You have this draw where you're seeing something that you almost never see. We got Sandra in the beginning who's in prison, and she's in, this is like her second or third time in there, and she just wants to see her daughter. But then the next one, and mind you, this is the one that I saw, and I wanted to see the movie for this reason, where you have Robin Wright in the grocery store pregnant, running into the guy that she dated like 5 years before. And just the blocking of that scene alone, you're like, wow, this is really, really special filmmaking. I remember that's what we all talked about in that class when we saw it. And then it's fitting that Alejandro González Iñárritu is a producer on this, and he would go on to champion this kind of filmmaking with Birdman and The Revenant, and maybe like stole Rodrigo Garcia's thunder. I'm surprised that even Emmanuel Lubezki didn't DP this. Like, it has an independent spirit to it.
It does.
And even though you have these huge names like Glenn Close and already said Robin Wright, and you got Sissy Spacek and Holly Hunter, Dakota Fanning when she was at the beginning of her career, Amanda Seyfried, same deal there, Ian McShane, who else?
William Fichtner.
William Fichtner.
Yeah, that was that
probably
may have been
his
the
best role
one.
ever, though.
Really?
I think so.
I don't think anything tops the bank teller in Dark Knight, just because it's the Dark Knight. But I don't. I'm not so sure that the thing about all these stories is that they're really all just about moments of pain or of some sort of conflict. Whether a lot of I guess whether mainly internal conflict. Like there's you brought up the supermarket scene, and there's those that old flame there that's kind of has the urge to jump back into something, but of course they can't. Or Amanda Seyfried, who's torn between her future or just being loyal to her family at that point.
Yeah, hers is probably the most interesting because
I think,
everyone
for
here,
someone our age,
not even for that reason. It's just every other protagonist you have here is an independent woman. Maybe they're not doing the smartest thing, the wisest thing. You got
but Amanda
Sissy
Seyfried is still
Spacek
growing into her own at that point.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you got Sissy Spacek, going to a motel to have an affair. You have what's her name, Kathy Baker, about to she's pre-op for breast removal for breast cancer. And then you get Amanda Seyfried, you get this Sammy character who's just going in between rooms, like playing messenger between her parents. And it's the only character that is like still an adolescent, or more so like not figured out where she is. Like it's the weirdest one, I think, just because it feels so peculiar, and maybe only that story is there to build up Sissy Spacek's standalone story.
I don't know. That's actually, I hesitate to say it's my favorite one, but I think that's the one I connected to the most, just because I connected to that just that idea where you're kind of being forced to decide your future, and you got your family telling you stuff, and that's stuff that I experienced not too long ago. Now I'm away from that. The weirdest one for me was, I'm not gonna lie, probably the William Fichtner one, just because the circumstances
I liked it, though.
there
It's so strange.
they're so weird, and they kind of it seems more like a Lifetime drama or some French comedy, but it's not really comedic in that one. And there was a couple of performances in there that just were not that good. I mean, the one with the friend that she saw, I guess, in the hallway. I don't know, something about
who also is a character from the fancy, what is it, the real fancy apartment, which
Yeah.
Jason Isaacs is in, who's in the grocery store one. It's like after the first one, you get at least one quote unquote cameo in all of them.
Yeah.
I think the best one is the fact that in the pre-op surgery, the nurse happens to be the
Holly.
daughter. Holly,
Yeah, that was the
who-
insane one, because she just seems
the
a lot
psychotic
more
break.
calm and collected at that point, and then you go back to her scene from earlier, and it's just like, whoa. I mean, that's different. Talk about like the main idea here that they kind of hammer in, but is connections, and how everyone sort of has they place little roles in other people's lives. But when it comes to their own lives, you have no idea. Like, you would never be able to tell from that one scene at the hospital exactly what's happening in Holly's life, what her circumstances
That's
were.
what's interesting, though, because there is no real timeline here. It's not linear. Who's to say when any of these stories are happening?
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that Holly in the hospital happened before she
Probably.
confronted her father,
Yeah.
just given how that one ends. But I think that one had the best, I think that one, not the best blocking, but definitely the best dialogue. I think that one was written the best, in my opinion. Like, you have this great line. She's like, whoever invented the telephone never understood conversation.
See, that's where I think it's a good line, but also that's where I sort of have problems with this movie. Like, I mean, when I get down to it, I think the movie's okay. It's interesting to think about, but for me, the experience of watching it, it's, you appreciate the aesthetic. They're able to create this naturalistic quality, but yet sometimes just the dialogue takes me out of it, and it feels like it's tacked on rather than naturalistic. And it's lines like that where it's like, I kind of like that line about the telephone, but then when it's delivered, I'm just kind of like, okay, you're hammering in the obvious, and I get it. You got limitations on time, but there's moments like that. Probably the worst one to me was in the first scene. The ubiquitous line is like, "Do you know what that means?"
No, that was horrible.
But there's stuff like that peppered throughout, and it's like, it's a tough thing, because it's like there's things about this movie that I really appreciate, that I wanna give it credit for, but then there's things that definitely took me out of it, and that I just felt were borderline pretentious throughout.
Well, it's weird because there's a weird balance in this film, given the aesthetic, and that it is, natural lighting and done in one take, and who knows how many times they filmed the individual moments. But when you film something in that way, and this is something that I remember talking about, did we review Birdman? Remember we talked about it on the end of the year list?
No, we were not
before
doing
the podcast.
We were not doing it yet, no.
But I remember just talking about Birdman in a certain way, because it kind of totally takes this kind of style of filmmaking to the nth degree, and just perfects what's possible with a singular take. And let's try to make a whole movie in a single take. But whereas that one, you could tell that they spent like months and months and months on just rehearsing. This is it's like director Rodrigo, he probably approached these actors, hey, I got this project, I don't really have a script, but here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna, like, for instance, the Robin Wright Jason Isaacs thing, they came up with the backstory. Apparently they decided that they were reporters, like, in the Bosnian War, and they met on, like, the battlefield, whereas on paper all that matters is you used to have a relationship, you're both no longer in the relationship, you run into each other, and that's have, like, those sparks fly for a little bit, but you both realize, like, oh, we shouldn't do this type of thing. And it's fitting because you're never going to guess what I did this weekend. Yeah, I saw her this weekend on purpose,
If
though.
you want to talk about this on here, go ahead. That's up to you.
It's less that I want to talk about it. It was more, even though I'd seen that grocery store scene, I kind of forgot that it was this movie when I started it. and it made me feel real shitty. And then also, like I said, you get that motel affair sequence, and a couple other things, and just the funeral. Like half of the scenes here are about like what women will do in the heat of the moment, and they don't really think everything through, or maybe they do, but who knows? Like, we're both men, we can't really talk about what the female experience is and just feminine wiles or any of those type of things. But I was sitting there, like, before I watched the movie, I saw her on Saturday, so I've had like a full day to just digest everything and whatnot. And I was sitting here, and it made me feel real shitty about everything, more so than I probably would have if I didn't watch the movie. But it was like, just it struck so true, even though, yeah, like, because the aesthetic and some of the dialogue here, it seems a little forced. Like, you have in Holly's sequence, she has that line, she's like, if every memory was a bad one, how great that would be. And it's totally true. Like, when you reminisce, especially for any of the more important relationships in your life, whether those be romantic or familial or workplace or anything, it's usually a balance of the two. It's like, oh, this was such a good time, and then a day later, all you can think about is like the time you were fighting for like 3 days straight or whatever. And it's never one or the other. You can never just remember the good or the bad. It's a combination of the two, because that's kind of what life is, and it's kind of like how this film is. Like, even in the bittersweet moments where you get, such as the funeral one, or even the graveyard at the end, because I think that's just, in terms of storytelling, the strongest one in terms of the aesthetic, because unless you're real stupid, you catch on that Dakota Fanning's character is a ghost. And then it also makes sense, because why would Glenn Close have a daughter that young?
This is funny, because I remember Dave showing that scene, and then he asked, like, really what the
What's
theme
it mean,
was.
guys?
Yeah, and I was the idiot that said I didn't see it. Like, I really didn't get it. And, like, I totally forgot the scene now when I was watching it, so I forgot how it ended. And I mean, it might be a controversial thought here, but I still feel like it's sort of pointless. Like, I see the appeal in performing it, but when you're watching it as a viewer, it's just like, okay, I get the ending, but then everything that precedes it, I'm just kind of like, like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you
it doesn't...
take into consideration the conversation that's there between Glenn Close explaining to Dakota Fanning,
like, yeah, it all adds up
why
later.
a graveyard
like,
is there, what a mausoleum is.
Why do you come
yeah,
here?
why do you
like,
come
every
here
year,
like,
just once a year?
Yeah. You want me to come here more?
Yeah.
Like, it's just real smart dialogue.
Well, then there's lines like, maybe that cat lives here and shits everywhere. I don't know. There's things that
there's a weird sense of humor throughout this film.
Yeah,
like,
no, which I guess that's what might be alienating me, is that they seem too similar in that sense, I guess, in that it's clear that it's weird, because it's a balance that the performers inhabit all these individuals in such a way that, and you get that from, I guess, the takes, especially because the beauty of when you do a long continuous take is that you cannot cut out any of the emotions. Those have to be playing constantly, and that's how you can appreciate performance. But you can get that from the actors. But when the way that something's written, it really feels like it's one individual's voice that's coming out. So it's a weird mix of both, and I'm not sure I like the feeling of that when I'm watching it.
It's what's the term? It's kind of, it's a fragmented story, purposefully. I mean, you can't make this. You couldn't do this like Birdman. It'd be very hard. But I don't know. There's just something real humane about it. That it isn't perfect. That it is fragmented and kind of jagged, and that the emotions are all over the place, and things that are supposed to be funny aren't, and things that are funny aren't supposed to. For instance, like in Holly's story, Lorna at the funeral, that, William Fichtner has that line. He's like, I think about you when I masturbate. Do you think about me? And just like seeing his sign language of like her rubbing his clit, like it was funny. Just like seeing that.
See, but that's funny in like I can't believe I'm watching this way to me. That like
Yeah.
I feel like I should be taking this seriously, and like that goes back to where I feel like this might just be one man's voice, in this case the writer's voice, because like the grocery store scene, it's like that's too similar, I guess, of just a worldview of men. And then even when you consider the Sissy Spacek motel scene, it seems like there's already there's like three different versions where like men are sort of portrayed in the same way in like the various lives of these women, and it's just like I don't know, like maybe I'm just not feeling enough diversity in this, because like especially when I got to the funeral, like I just felt some things were a bit of the same, and it was getting a bit more audacious at that point. Yeah, I mean the funeral one, I don't know, I had the hardest time taking that one seriously.
It's just I don't think most of the film is serious, even when they're having
Well, but
kind of over the top sequences. Like, okay, Hollies,
mhm.
the fact that you have this older sister and you never know throughout it, like, was she molested by
Yeah,
their
but
father,
you're dealing
or
with
is
those
she
themes,
crazy?
which are
Like,
pretty intense. And I mean, probably one of the best performed ones too was the one with Kathy Baker, just as far as like that anxiety of going into a surgery like that.
that
Like
one's also weird too
that one
because it
feels
has
too real though. Like
it's
just the
the
emotions
camera
that
doesn't
are
move.
but
That's
just,
why, like,
yeah,
it's a stationary right there.
it's
Like, it
really
goes
just one
from
room.
one side of the bed to the other, but that shift only happens once she gets the sedative. That's it. But yeah, you got
Really,
this.
yeah, though, just as far as performance, like just how that like a bunch of emotions play there, like just because there's clearly a lot of stress and anxiety just going into that, and then
Oh, I
the
take it
way
back,
that
actually.
ends too, like it just was even though yeah, like just the babbling and the incoherent back and forth there was just really that probably affected me the most in this.
It's like that one also had two quote unquote cameos or connections, because the anesthesiologist is Mary Kay Place, who plays Lorna's mom in the funeral segment. So it's, you get one, maybe two on hand every time, and it's I just think this isn't necessarily a film. It's obviously a series of short films, but I think it's more just an experiment in what's possible on film, because something like this isn't done frequently, even by today's standards, and that's also because people film on digital. But even
Yeah.
still, it's like just having an anthology film where they all fit together, and yet it isn't like an actual overarching narrative. Like, you kind of have that dialogue about, yeah, do cats actually have 9 lives? And you could be like, oh, the name of the movie's 9 lives, maybe that's it. But no, I just see these are the lives of 9 different people. This is 9 lives. Like, there really isn't kind of like really a theme here. It's just, why don't we make an anthology series or anthology film about different women in the LA area and what it would be like to be them in situations that you don't see often in any kind of medium, especially film. And yeah,
I
it's
do think
like,
there is a theme though, and like it does bring up this line of connections. I can't remember in which story it is, but I mean, yeah, like there's movies like Cloud Atlas that dealt with that, or
$20.
or Fish Story. Movies that just deal with like how individuals can kind of cross paths and affect each other's lives or be a part of them in ways that you just don't expect. And like I do find that idea generally interesting, and I guess here it is. I don't know. Like there is something here that just leads me to like thinking. It's something that like after I see it, like I think about it for a little bit, but then I still feel underwhelmed at the same time. And that's not that's not necessarily a mark against it, I guess, because like I know that this will definitely be more effective for somebody else. But yeah, I mean, technically, as well, like it is interesting. Like I don't even think this was shot digitally. I think it was shot on.
No,
It looked like
100%.
16.
Definitely not shot digitally.
Yeah.
Because
Which
it wouldn't be as short of segments if it
Yeah.
was digital. It would just, you could potentially go on forever.
And
But
I mean, I'm not gonna. I love plugging in too late, but just they pushed it even farther. But that's a completely different movie, though. That's a genre film. So
I personally was affected by this film, and that could be, like I said, in terms of my quick watch of this after having emotional meet up very recently. But I think it's more just the weight of these stories, how none of them are happy-go-lucky. That, typically speaking, the kind of films I enjoy, I want to laugh at, or I want to learn something, or the guy gets the girl, or whatever. And this one is just like slices of life. Maybe it's not a perfect slice, like it's a little bit too small, or it's a little too obtuse, but it feels like you're looking through a window into someone or 9 someone's lives, and just how despite how inconsequential they might seem, like, oh no, it is a bigger picture that this person is going to show up in this way and this way and this way, and much in the way that that's how life is. Like, you'll meet someone, you kind of know them, but not really, and then you'll work with someone who's like their older sister's boyfriend or something, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if it's in the same city or across the country. The world is a really small place, and especially a city. And I shared some of those details with the girl I mentioned earlier. Just some of the funny life events that kind of we cross paths without knowing it, type of thing. And I don't know if I had watched this before our rendezvous, if it would have had the same effect on me. But after I finished this, I definitely didn't want to record. I wanted to think about it in a way that I normally don't when we do this show. Typically speaking, I go, "Oh, yep, I'm done. Let's talk about it now." And this one, no. Like I wanted to pad the time. I wanted to think about things. I just wanted to digest what I just saw, and I think it's going to have that effect on a lot of people, especially perhaps if they are a woman and they're watching this one. But I think it's interesting filmmaking, not because of the aesthetic or the choices or the connections or whatever you want to throw at it from an artistic standpoint, but more so that this is a male director and it is about women. And there's a big thing, especially in Hollywood currently, where women are being underutilized. Like, you'll see tweets like, X number percentage of the films in 2016 were directed by women. Why don't we have female blockbuster directors? What's up with this? What's up with that? And yet you have this thing that no one's seen, that's over a decade old now, that was totally championing the kind of stories that women can be at the forefront of. And I think that's why this does seem kind of weird to you, or how I think you said that just men are kind of like, not cliched, but like underutilized.
It's just in the
or-
way that it's treated in the story, you can definitely get that sense. But I mean, I do at least like, especially the grocery store scene, like there is real emotion, and like there's, I did not know the backstory that they came up with, the actors themselves for that. Like that's one of the strongest scenes in this, and like
It's
I
so
think that's I think it's because you can feel that. And but like I don't know, there is something about anthology movies like this, like just one that's coming to mind right now is a completely different movie, but it's David Wayne's The 10, which is
I know what it is about the Ten Commandments.
10 different
It's
stories
like,
that are based on that. But like the danger with doing movies with like different pieces spread like that is that naturally some are going to end up stronger than others, and usually it ends up kind of balancing out between an even 50-50 of like, okay, a couple are great, a couple are not so good, and then the rest are just kind of in the middle. And I mean, that's just how I feel about this. Honestly, like the one, it still just leaves me kind of cold and just whatever, even though I understand the point of it. I don't know, it just doesn't resonate with me, the Glenn Close one. And I mean, that's why I like having time to think about movies after viewing them, because if I jumped into this right away, I probably would have just been in such a shitty mood, because it's a real downer of a movie, and I would just been like, oh god, it fucking drags and whatnot. I mean, it's not a pleasant experience, and that's for sure. But I don't mind that in movies. Usually, if you can find meaning in that, that's a good thing. Not everything has to be out there just to entertain you and make you feel happy. Usually, the best thing to me is if a movie just makes an impression on you and makes you think about it, whether or not you like it. Like I'm not gonna buy this for $1. I'm not very positive on it. I'm not gonna tell people exactly that they should see it, but because I don't know many people that would be into it in the first place. But if you're game for it, it's one of those where it's definitely worth checking out, and it could definitely hold meaning for somebody if you're willing to have a conversation about it, regardless of whether it appeals to you or not. Like, that's one of the reasons why I like having this podcast, is this is not something I would really ever discuss with anyone usually, but I do have this outlet to do that. And I, even if this movie, it doesn't feel that special to me, I still think it has merit at least, and it's definitely got to feel special for somebody else out there.
I think the strangest thing about this film is, we're talking about interconnectivity and these women showing up in different stories and whatnot, and then you get the Glenn Close one at the end, which is this ending, this, you could look at it almost like an epilogue. It's the kind of it kind of tries to branch everything together and make it bigger than it actually is, instead of just windows into these women's lives. It's like, oh no, but this is, it's about the cats and about the kids and the dead people and living together or whatever. And that's the only one where no one appears from any other stories. And I don't know what to say about that necessarily. It kind of seems like the odd one out. Maybe that's what the original short that was planned here. It's like, oh, what if we have this older woman in a graveyard having like a date with her dead daughter, like, and then we have a reveal then, like, oh, she was with the ghost.
Well, what if
thing.
you consider the city of LA as a character? Because I just
it totally
the way,
is, yeah.
the way that's presented in this movie, like, I don't know if it doesn't necessarily seem like an odd one out in that sense, because I wasn't really looking for the connections in these stories. Like, I saw them, but I did not try to find out what every single one of them were. So
yeah, I didn't make any notes about the connections. It's just in watching it, they're
like that does
apparent.
stick out for that reason. So
Yeah.
but I don't know, like, it's
a purposeful, like, little Easter egg, if you will. Like, it doesn't bring anything extra to the story having noticed these interconnected parts, but it makes it feel just, I don't know the correct term, just it's like it makes it feel bigger than it is. That it's not a series of stories, but this is a single story.
Well,
and
yeah,
each person has their part, even if you don't realize it at first. And I think just because of that, and also the aesthetic and how it made me think about things that I've experienced, and just how fucking good the grocery scene is. Like, the first time I'd ever heard about this film, they showed it to us, and everyone was seriously blown away. We're like, wow, like, I didn't know you could make a movie like that. Like, that was special. Like, that was really good. And seeing it again, like, even still, like, that, for instance, if you had a YouTube clip of that sequence and you shared it with someone, they'd probably want to see the movie in the same way that I did, just because you know nothing about these characters. Everything you learn, they literally tell you, or you see it on their face. And yet this is the kind of interaction that almost everyone on the planet is going to have at some point. Maybe you're not going to be married, and they are too when you have it, but running into an ex-lover and that kind of just je ne sais quoi like that, you can't even speak on it, but
it just brings back these old feelings that you're not even sure, like, they're not necessarily right to just jump into, but you feel them, and there's that impulse to jump into it, even though, like, your mind that's thinking logically at that point, it's wrong. And it's the weirdest thing too. Like,
it's really strange.
It's like nostalgia kicking in when you really don't want it to, because you know that you're gonna fall back into something that you shouldn't.
I think that's the beauty of the scene too, because you have this final confrontation between them, where this man who's sterile kisses her baby, or her womb rather, and then she's happy that he's gone, and sure enough, the next thing she does is search for him, and she's like almost manic because he's gone, that she can't find him, and he's probably gone from her life, and she has this regret, and there's just so many emotions in just that one scene alone that kind of run the gamut of what the human experience is, that I gotta buy it for $1, even if just for that one sequence. Like, I agree with you that not all of them are that great. The humor's kind of weird. The script writing is a little off at times. The camera is a little too flaunty. Like, the aesthetic is, like, really on its sleeve in certain sequences. But just to even try to do this and to get this many people on board, like, I understand why both Roger and the Ebert and Roper put this on their 10 of the year list. Like, it makes sense to me. Like, this is just a kind of movie that you don't get frequently,
especially like 12 years ago now.
Yeah, like it's a special kind of thing. Like, like I said, you could watch just one or two of these, turn it off. The next day, watch 3, turn it off. Like, you could watch this like you read a book. It doesn't have to be.
That's kind of how I did it.
Yeah, you don't have to watch this in one go. It's a little too heavy-handed to do that. Like, it's a really downer. Like, it's gonna really mess with your head and make you feel certain things and make you maybe want to contact some people that you shouldn't. But I was also thinking, like, well, what if I brought her home that night and we watched this? Like, I was that's the kind of things I
I'm
was
willing to
thinking.
bet that probably after that first story, you would have been like, maybe we shouldn't be watching this right now. And then you'd cut it off, and the night there, and then maybe you'd finish the supermarket scene on your own, and then be like, damn it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Who can tell? But yeah, I gotta buy this one just because it's such an interesting thing. And it's like you said, if it wasn't for this podcast, this is probably the kind of movie that would never get brought up in conversation, just because that's the way the world works. Like it's so old now, except it's not a classic. There's nothing here necessarily that's like, oh my god, I just saw this movie, ever heard of this type of thing. However, if I ran like a blog that championed like filmmaking by women, this would be like an honorable mention. It'd be like, oh yeah, so this one isn't exactly made by women, but it's like the best version of a film for women made by a man type of thing. Thanks for listening. We hope it's been a pleasure. If you like this show and you want to hear more of our wonderful voices on a weekly basis, check out 2 Cents. I'll recap what's happened in film, TV, and tech news.
We're also on the titular Dollar Review Show, a spoiler-free critique of new releases or anything we've discovered on our own, whether that be TV, music, etc.
You can find all of our content at dollarreviews.net. Follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook at Dollar Reviews.
And we're also on Google Play Music, iTunes, Pocket Cast, TuneIn, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, just about anywhere on the internet with hours of content available to you for free. But for those of you that feel that the show is worth your dollar, you can send us a donation at patreon.com/dollarreviews. Contributions not only earn our undying love, but they also make it possible for us to improve our recording equipment and to give you the highest quality episodes possible. But more importantly, they'd be helping us acquire the content to review. Trips to the multiplex are expensive, and the more donations we receive, the more films we can review for your listening pleasure.
If you listen somewhere we're currently not available, you'd like to contribute some talking points, send a Death to Cinema request, or if you just want to laugh at us, you can do so by reaching out to us on social media or send an email to brian@dollarreviews.net.
Or you can email me as well, steve@dollarreviews.net.
You can follow me personally on Twitter at Brian Gillis, that's BRYONGILLIS, and now you know how to spell the email too, and also under the same name on the lovely site Letterboxd, which acts as my film diary, where I rate films I'm watching, write the occasional review, and even sometimes compile lists.
You can also find me on Twitter at S_MTX, and also follow my film diary at Letterboxd under the same name, where I log everything I watch, and sometimes write brief reviews.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep the change.